Back when I was 22, my cousin Tyler and I went on several camping trips across Colorado. This one happened in Reiner Forest. It was my first time camping there, though Tyler had been before. It was midweek. Our jobs gave us random days off, so we often went on these trips then to avoid the usual crowds and traffic. Tyler always took the lead on these outings. He was the one with scouting experience, not me. We parked near a picnic ground and started hiking into the woods from there. After about 15 minutes, we found a decent clearing. Enough space for 2 tents, a portable stove, and a fire. We unpacked and started setting up. Tyler always managed to pitch his tent in just a few minutes. It usually took me over 20. That would end up being the last time I set up a tent like that. We made a fire ring from stones and collected sticks and wood. Tyler had brought fire starter and a lighter, so we didn't have to try too hard. The sun was going down, and he had the fire going, grilling steak and burgers like he always did. He never skimped on food, and he was good at cooking it too. We had bear spray, though he'd always say it was more of a formality. According to him, the biggest danger deep in the woods wasn't wildlife, it was people. We ate around the fire, drinking beers, listening to old rock songs from a speaker. If you've ever sat in the woods with someone you trust, full meal in your stomach, music going, nothing but trees and open sky, then you'd understand. When it got dark, we pulled out a small fold-out table and played cards. After some regular games, we moved on to Uno. That was when the sound came. I paused the music. It became clear, footsteps, and someone humming, somewhere out beyond the trees in the dark. Tyler told me to find the flashlight, but by the time I had it in my hand, the noises had already stopped. I asked if that was something we should be worried about. He said it was definitely odd for anyone to be that far out, especially to come by a lit campfire and hum like that. We tried to get back into the card game, but the speaker stayed low. Then, a stick landed in the middle of our campsite, not a small twig falling from a tree. This was a deliberate throw. Tyler called out into the woods, telling whoever was out there to get lost. Footsteps followed, heading away from the clearing. I wanted to pack up and go. Tyler said that hiking out in the dark was worse. He reminded me we had bear spray and said to keep it next to me in the tent. Eventually, we had to get some rest. We agreed to take turns staying awake to make sure no one came back and tried anything. He'd take the first watch. Said he'd just read his book. I got in my sleeping bag, zipped up the tent, and tried to get some sleep. Waking up while camping isn't unusual. You're in the cold on the ground, not exactly comfortable. I woke up without knowing why. Still half asleep, I looked toward the tent entrance. A head was poking in. Looked like Tyler at first. I mumbled his name, asking if it was my turn to keep watch. The figure didn't respond. I blinked, thinking my eyes were just adjusting, but the face remained a shadow. Then the zipper went up, fast, and the head was gone. I lay back for just a second before sitting up straight. Something didn't feel right. I listened. Footsteps moved away from my tent. I whispered Tyler's name again, but no answer. I opened the zipper, peeked out. The fire had gone out. Tyler wasn't there. I walked over to his tent, unzipped it, and found him still asleep inside his bag. My chest went cold. I shook him awake and told him someone else was at the campsite. He needed a minute to fully understand. But when he did, he grabbed the bear spray, said he must have dozed off without realizing. He told me to sleep in his tent for the rest of the night. I needed my sleeping bag though, so he came with me, standing watch while I went back to get it. While I was inside my tent grabbing it, I heard the humming again, closer this time. Tyler whispered at me to hurry. I asked if he heard it too. He said he did. We zipped ourselves into his tent and kept the bear spray close. I lay there, hoping some wild animal would come along and chase whoever that was off. The next few hours dragged. I stayed up while Tyler slept. Then we switched. By the time he woke me up again, light had started to come through the trees. We packed fast, without breakfast. By the time everything was in our packs, it was bright enough to hike out without flashlights. We didn't say much on the way back. We could have found another spot, set up again somewhere else, but neither of us was up for it. That was 6 years ago. Tyler suggested more trips since then. I always say I'm too busy, but the truth is, I just don't want to. I haven't camped since. I still think about the person in the woods, humming, throwing things, and staring into my tent while I slept. I don't know what they wanted. I don't want to find out. I just finished a draining business trip in Cleveland, the kind where every sentence felt like walking a tightrope. Negotiations had been tense, and by the time it was over, I felt like I hadn't slept in a week. I was supposed to drive back to Indianapolis that night, but I couldn't do it. I needed to decompress, so I looked for a place to stay along the route and booked a no-name roadside motel, just something simple to crash in for the night. The place was nothing fancy, a squat one-story building with a buzzing neon sign that looked like it hadn't worked properly in years. My room had the essentials: a stiff bed, a small TV, and a bathroom that smelled like someone had poured bleach straight down the drain. Still, after the day I'd had, it was good enough. I changed into something comfortable, just a t-shirt and sweats, and tried to push the day out of my head. My phone lit up with emails from work, but I left them unread. I was done thinking about business. A little after 1 a.m., I heard a strange sound outside my door. At first, I assumed it was just late-night noise, maybe a couple fighting, or drunk guests being loud. But it got louder, more urgent. Then I realized what I was hearing: a woman screaming, not shouting, screaming, full of panic. I sat up, frozen, trying to decide what to do. Call the front desk? Open the door? Before I could make up my mind, her screams turned into frantic words. She was yelling about her husband, that someone had attacked him, that he might be dead. That was enough to make me move. I cracked the door open and saw her. A woman in a robe, tears streaming down her face. She looked at me and begged for help, saying a man who worked at the motel had come to their room and assaulted her husband. She said he was dead. I didn't know how to react. Still in shock, I asked where he was. She pointed to a room just a few doors down and told me his body was still there. Against better judgment, I followed her, more out of instinct than reason. When I stepped into the room, I saw a man lying on the floor, completely still. I'm not a medical professional, but he didn't look like he was breathing. Not long after, the police arrived. I'm guessing someone else had already called them, or maybe the front desk had. Either way, they got there fast. They led me back into the hallway while they secured the room. The woman was hysterical, telling them it had been a motel employee. She claimed she recognized him from earlier, that he'd been cleaning floors during check-in, and somehow got them to open their door later that night. Said he claimed there was something wrong with the room, maybe a maintenance issue. But when the officers started asking how he got inside, how he bypassed a locked door, she didn't have a clear answer. She mumbled something about him talking his way in, and her husband opening the door. It didn't add up. The motel manager was called in to bring out all the staff on duty. A handful of people showed up when a couple housekeepers, a maintenance guy, the night clerk. The woman insisted none of them were the man who attacked her husband. The manager calmly told the officers that these were all the staff working that night. No one else had been on shift. I saw the police exchange glances. Something wasn't right. They decided to review the surveillance footage from the office. That's when the woman started to panic even more. She pleaded with them to search the grounds, saying the attacker might be trying to get away. But they ignored her and went straight to the footage. I wasn't in the room when they reviewed the video, but I heard what they found later. The security footage didn't show any mysterious employee approaching the room. It didn't even show anyone knocking on the door. What it did show was the woman herself earlier that night, wearing a mask and wandering around the lot like she was looking for someone. Then she went back into the room, and shortly after that came out screaming. No attacker, no one forcing entry, just her. She was arrested right there on suspicion of killing her husband. There were enough inconsistencies and enough evidence for the police to act. They sealed off the room and started searching for a weapon. I didn't stick around after that. I had no interest in watching them put up crime scene tape or collect evidence. I packed my bag, checked out with the day's night clerk, and got back on the road. It was nearly 3 a.m., but I didn't care. Driving through the night felt safer than staying in that place 1 second longer. I never found out what happened after that. I didn't follow the news, didn't look for updates. Maybe I didn't want to know. My mind kept replaying it for days. Her screaming, the body on the floor. The moment the cops realized her story didn't make sense. The whole thing was surreal. I'd stopped at that motel thinking it was just going to be a place to sleep. Instead, I ended up in the middle of something dark and bizarre. I haven't stayed at a rundown roadside motel since, and I don't plan to, not after that night. When I was about 8 years old, I was the youngest in the house by a long shot. My parents had me late, and my 2 siblings were both at least 10 years older. One night, I woke up to some kind of noise downstairs, arguing or something urgent. I got out of bed, opened my door just a crack, and listened. It was my parents. They were clearly stressed about something. I crept to the top of the stairs and called down to them, trying to see what was going on. My mom looked up at me from the bottom of the steps and told me to head back to bed. She sounded serious. I didn't ask any questions. I just listened. Not long after that, I heard the front door slam shut. Then, nothing. Total silence. I figured they must have left the house, but I didn't know why. Either way, I went back to bed just like my mom told me to. Later that night, I woke up again. I heard the front door close once more, followed by soft footsteps. No talking this time. I figured my parents had come back and were trying not to wake me. I lay there listening to sounds coming from downstairs. A few thuds, cabinets opening and shutting. I was sure I heard the fridge being opened. I figured it was probably my older brother. He was already driving at the time and often came home late. Him digging through the fridge at 2 or 3 a.m. wouldn't have been strange. That explanation made me feel a little more at ease. Then the footsteps started coming up the stairs, slowly, heavily. They got closer and closer until they reached my door, and then stopped. The door creaked open, slow and careful. I didn't sit up. I just opened my eyes and kept them on the doorway, still lying flat in bed. The hallway lights were off, so I couldn't see much. Just the dark shape of a head or face peeking into the room. I called out a few names, my brother's first, then my mom's, then my dad's. After that, I just asked who it was. The person didn't respond. They just pulled the door shut and walked away. I heard the footsteps moving back down the stairs. I told myself it had to be my dad, maybe just checking in on me quietly. But something about it fell off. Why hadn't he said anything? After a while of laying there, I got too curious. I got out of bed and tiptoed downstairs without turning on any lights. As I reached the edge of the kitchen, I froze. There was someone standing in the center of the kitchen. Tall, still. I assumed it was my dad, so I said his name. Whoever it was replied in a deep voice, telling me to go back upstairs. I didn't wait. I turned and ran back to my room, jumped under the covers, heart racing. But something didn't sit right. The voice, it sounded wrong, too deep, not like my dad at all. It hadn't even crossed my mind yet that it could have been a stranger. My mind wasn't wired for that kind of fear at that age. Not until later, when the front door opened again and I heard new voices, my parents. I got out of bed and met them at the top of the stairs. They looked surprised that I was awake. I asked what was going on, and they told me that my brother had gotten into a small accident, but that he was okay. Months later, I found out what really happened. Chris had been driving in a state he shouldn't have been in, and he crashed. My parents had gotten a call from the hospital and rushed out to see him. I asked my dad if he had come into my room earlier that night, and he looked confused. That's when I learned they'd been gone for hours. My mom got upset, started yelling at my dad. He had forgotten to lock the front door in the rush to leave. I told them what I saw, the dark figure in my doorway, the person standing in the kitchen, the voice. My dad grabbed his gun and searched the entire house. My mom called the police. I don't remember much after that, just that a police officer asked me to explain what I saw. My parents later told me they were completely embarrassed having to admit they left their young kid home alone and didn't even lock the door. As far as I know, nothing was stolen, nothing was broken, but someone came inside. They didn't try to hurt me. They didn't take anything. Still, knowing a stranger was in our house, standing right there by my bed, silently watching me in the dark, it never really left me. My name is Lena Carter, and I was 17 years old when this happened. I've lived in Bloomington, Minnesota most of my life. My parents own a modest 2-story house on a quiet street not far from Summit Ridge High School, where I was a junior at the time. Finals were just around the corner. Anyone who has gone through exam season understands how the pressure slowly eats away at you, day after day. That Thursday afternoon, I came home from school already overwhelmed with stress. I had a major history test the following morning, and I was nowhere near prepared. To make things more difficult, my parents were getting ready to leave for my cousin Jake's wedding in Mapleton, which was about an hour and a half away. They would be gone until Monday, meaning I would be spending the entire weekend alone for the first time. I helped my mom load their luggage into the back of the SUV and ran through her usual checklist with her. She could tell I was nervous, so before getting into the car, she gave me a long hug and told me to call immediately if anything seemed unusual or made me feel uncomfortable. I told her I would, and although I did my best to seem confident, I was already feeling unsettled. They left just after 6 p.m., and the house quickly became unnaturally quiet. I usually enjoy solitude, especially when I need to study, but that night something about the silence felt off. Without the sounds of my parents' daily routine in the background, no footsteps, no conversations, no movement, every little noise stood out. I became highly aware of the ticking of the living room clock, the low hum of the refrigerator, and the way the floors occasionally creaked as the house settled. I tried to distract myself by watching television, hoping the background noise would help me relax. Although it provided some relief, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Eventually, I took out my phone and texted my friend Tasha, who was also preparing for the same history test. I asked her if she would be willing to stay the night so we could study together, and she replied that she could be there by 9 o'clock. When she arrived, I felt a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The house suddenly felt more alive. We spread out our books and notes on the coffee table in the living room and began reviewing chapters. Around 10, Tasha mentioned that she needed to use the restroom, and I told her she could use the one connected to my bedroom upstairs. It was cleaner, and my mom always kept it stocked with fresh towels. Less than 2 minutes later, she returned to the living room, looking visibly shaken. She told me that while she was upstairs, she had noticed someone sitting outside in one of the deck chairs in the backyard. At first, I assumed she was mistaken and had probably seen a shadow or the reflection of something moving in the wind. However, she insisted that she had clearly seen the outline of a person sitting still in the chair. We both went upstairs and looked out through the window in my bedroom. I stared into the backyard carefully. The porch light was dim, but still bright enough to illuminate the area. The chair she described was empty. Nothing moved. Everything appeared completely still. I suggested that it might have been her imagination, or maybe a trick of the light. Tasha didn't argue with me, but I could tell she still felt uncomfortable. The rest of the night passed without any other disturbances. Tasha eventually fell asleep in my room, and when morning came, we laughed about the whole thing, assuming it had just been nerves from studying too much. She went home later that afternoon, and I returned to my notes. 2 nights later, on Saturday, there was a heavy rainstorm. The wind outside was loud, and it kept knocking the fence behind the house. Tasha wasn't able to come over that night because her father was recovering from a minor surgery, and she had to stay home to watch her younger siblings. I tried to study again, but it was much harder to focus. The storm made every sound feel more intense, and that old feeling of discomfort began creeping in once more. At one point, I became aware of a soft, repetitive noise coming from outside. It reminded me of the sound wooden furniture makes when someone slowly shifts their weight in it. I paused everything and paid close attention. The sound repeated, quiet but distinct, and seemed to come from the direction of the back deck. I made my way upstairs slowly, turning off lights behind me as I went to avoid being visible from outside. Once I reached my bedroom, I gently parted the curtains and looked into the backyard. The porch light still cast a faint glow across the wet deck, and this time I saw exactly what Tasha had described. A man was sitting in the same deck chair she had pointed out 2 nights earlier. He was completely still. Although I couldn't make out his features, his posture suggested that he was looking in my direction. I couldn't tell if he actually saw me, but the thought that he might be watching was horrifying. I picked up my phone, hands trembling, and prepared to call someone, my parents, the police, anyone who could help. Before I managed to make the call, I was startled by a loud knock at the front door. The sound was firm and deliberate. My first thought was that it might be the man outside trying to trick me into coming to the door. But then I heard someone say they were with the police. A second voice followed, and this one I immediately recognized as Mrs. Emery, our next-door neighbor. My mom had specifically asked her to check in on me while they were away. I went downstairs cautiously and looked through the peephole. Standing on the front porch were Mrs. Emery and a police officer. I opened the door and let them in. My whole body was tense. Mrs. Emery explained that she had been cleaning her attic, which had a small window facing my backyard. From that window, she had seen a man sitting in one of the chairs on our deck. She had called the police right away, and they had arrived within minutes. By the time the officer got there, however, the man was gone. They searched the yard and the surrounding area, but found no sign of him. The officer spoke to me calmly and advised that, given the circumstances, I should stay somewhere else until my parents returned. Mrs. Emery didn't hesitate. She insisted that I pack an overnight bag and sleep at her place for the remainder of the weekend. I didn't argue. I was still shaken and barely able to process what was happening. Before we left, I took one last look through the back door. The chair on the deck was still there, now soaked by rain. It was empty again. That night, I lay in the guest room at Mrs. Emery's house, unable to sleep. My thoughts kept circling back to the image of the man on the deck and the possibility that he had returned before vanishing. When my parents came back that Monday, I told them everything. After that weekend, I refused to spend another night alone in the house until I moved away for college. Nothing was stolen, no one got inside. But even though there was no direct confrontation, the fear I experienced was absolutely real, and I still remember it as clearly as if it happened yesterday. When I was 23, I had to relocate out of state for work. The company I was with offered me a better position, and even though I didn't want to leave home, I couldn't say no. I'm back now, thankfully, working at the local branch, but at the time I needed a place to live that wouldn't wipe out my paychecks. I posted everywhere I could: Craigslist, Facebook groups, subreddits, even Twitter, just looking for someone who needed a roommate. A guy named Drew messaged me on Facebook, said he had a spare room in his place, fully furnished, and he was open to renting it out. I looked through his profile to get a sense of him. He seemed normal enough. His pictures didn't raise any red flags. We ended up FaceTiming so he could show me the place. It was a modest house, nothing fancy, but it looked clean and livable. He told me he owned it, no roommates, and it was just 10 minutes from my new office. He came off polite, maybe a little too eager, but I was desperate, and honestly just relieved someone responded. Within a week, I'd packed everything and drove to the new city. Drew met me outside and handed me a key. The first thing I noticed in person was that he was shorter than he looked in photos, just about eye level with me. He helped me carry in a few heavy bags and showed me the room, said one of his friends used to live in it, but they'd moved out recently. The room was already furnished, but I changed the pillows and bedding with my own. That whole day was just me getting settled. Drew hovered a bit, made small talk, asked a lot of questions. I figured he was just trying to be friendly. The next morning, he offered to drive me around the city and show me some local spots. I didn't really want to, but I agreed just to avoid seeming rude. He took me past shopping centers, some food places, normal stuff. Then he suggested we get lunch, sit down, like a proper lunch. I said I wasn't hungry. He followed that up with, "Okay, how about drinks?" I told him I don't drink on work nights. He didn't take that well. He kept pushing, saying, "Just one, come on." I stayed polite, but firm. Eventually he gave up, but he went completely silent after that, like I'd offended him. That week, work started, and I had a lot to focus on. It wasn't until a few days in that I noticed something weird. I came home one night and went to do laundry. My hamper looked like it had been moved, just not how I left it. I started loading the washer and realized a pair of my underwear was missing. I tore my room apart looking for it. Nothing. At first, I tried to convince myself maybe I misplaced it, but the thought crossed my mind, what if Drew? I didn't want to believe it. Still, I needed some peace of mind. That weekend, I went to the hardware store and bought a locking doorknob. Swapped it out myself while Drew was gone. I figured I'd explain it later. He didn't come home that night. I assumed he was working. His schedule was random. But at around 1:30 in the morning, I woke up to banging on my door. He was outside, calling my name. He didn't sound calm. I stayed silent and pretended to be asleep. The next morning, I had texts from him. "We need to talk. Be home after work." I asked if it was about the lock. He said yes. I apologized, told him I planned to bring it up. His response was cold. "It comes off today." I tried to reason with him, told him I was a woman living with a man I didn't know well, and it just made me feel safer. He softened a little, but still said it had to go. What really shook me was how he even knew I changed it. I hadn't left the old knob lying around. The only way he'd know is if he tried coming in. The next day, I swapped the knob back. I didn't like it, but I didn't want to make things worse. A couple days later, there was a knock at the door. Drew wasn't home. It was a girl about my age. She asked if I was living with him. I told her yes, and she just said, "You need to get out of here." She told me Drew had multiple restraining orders from women in the area. Said he had a pattern, inviting women in, trying to isolate them, sometimes worse. She lived nearby and saw me move in, waited for a chance to warn me. I was stunned. She gave me her number, told me she'd help however she could, and left. I started looking for another place immediately. Found a studio across town being sublet. More expensive, but I didn't care. I told Drew I'd be moving out due to a family emergency. He got home an hour later and asked about my message. I stuck to my story. He said he'd get the money back to me tomorrow. Later that night, he knocked on my door again. Asked me if someone had said something. I said no. He stared at me for a while and said, "You're leaving because someone talked to you." I told him that wasn't it. That night, I woke up and screamed. Drew was sitting on the edge of my bed. He clamped his hand over my mouth and whispered, "Shh." I begged him not to hurt me. He said, "Why would I do that?" and started touching my leg. I ran, bolted past him and out the door, called the police from behind a bush. When they arrived, they questioned him. He acted like I was overreacting, said he never entered my room. The officers let me gather my things while they waited outside. I made him Venmo me the rest of the rent right there. He played calm the whole time. One of the cops pulled me aside before I left and quietly told me that Drew had prior arrests for similar situations. But it was all hearsay, no way to charge him this time. I drove straight to a hotel, moved into the studio the next day. I'll never live with another man again unless he's someone I truly know and trust. If you've made it this far, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Now, let's not waste any more time and get into the next story. When I was about 21, I used to spend a lot of nights alone at my parents' house. They owned a place right on a small pond, and across the water was this quiet little public park. The neighborhood wasn't packed. Each house had a lot of space around it, and it was one of those upper-class streets that stood out from the rest of town. I'd already moved out by this point, but during college breaks, I'd often stay there while they were away, at one of their other houses. They traveled a lot, so I got used to having the place to myself. This happened one random summer night. I couldn't tell you if it was a weekend or not. It didn't matter since I was off school and alone. I was in the sunroom watching something on TV. That room was my favorite in the warmer months, since it caught the breeze just right and felt so comfortable. I was curled up on the corner of the couch, right next to the big windows, when I heard this strange splashing noise outside. At first, I figured it was just wildlife, maybe ducks fighting or geese flapping around. It happened from time to time, but the sound didn't go away. In fact, it got more intense. I turned down the volume and leaned in toward the glass, trying to listen more closely. The splashes were too heavy, more like someone swimming. A man's voice started humming, low, casual, drifting through the dark. Someone was out there, in the pond. Now, technically, each property owned a section of the water, so if someone was in our part, they were trespassing. I stepped outside onto the deck and looked out into the darkness. I couldn't see much. I flicked on the outdoor lights, just the ones near the back patio. A portion of the pond lit up, and the noise stopped instantly. The humming, the splashes, gone. They'd seen me. I wondered for a second if maybe it was a neighbor being weird, but no one ever swam in that pond, especially not at night. And even if it was a neighbor, I wasn't about to go confront them. I stepped back inside, turned the lights off, locked the door, and sat down. I texted my older brother, who was still away at college, but he didn't respond right away. I tried to distract myself with the show I'd been watching, but it wasn't working. I couldn't focus. Every now and then, I'd glance out into the backyard, but it was pitch black again. What I didn't think about, at least not right away, was how much light that TV was throwing into the room. From the outside, it must have made me completely visible. Then I thought I heard something. Out on the deck, I scrambled to find the remote and turned the TV off. The room dropped into silence and darkness, and my eyes took a few seconds to adjust. There was slow, heavy breathing just outside the nearest window. I didn't move. Through the glass, a voice, low, raspy, deliberate, said, "I see you." I blurted out, "Jason, is that you?" Jason was one of our neighbors, and saying his name was the only thing I could think of, just grasping at the hope that maybe, somehow, this was a horrible prank. No answer, just footsteps backing away across the deck. I stayed on the couch, flat and still. My heart was racing. I waited until it was dead silent again. Then I got up and ran through the house, checking every single door. Locked. Thank God. Eventually, I texted my entire family. My dad called and told me to turn the outside lights back on and check the yard. Told me I needed to be brave, to step up while I was home alone, so I listened. I grabbed a large kitchen knife, flipped the backyard lights back on, and went out. Nothing looked off until I looked down. On the deck, faint but still visible, were wet footprints, barefoot, already starting to dry in places, but still easy to see. I followed them slowly around to the side of the deck. Just over the edge, barely peeking up from below, was the top of someone's head, forehead. He was staring up like he'd been listening the whole time, waiting. He turned away and slipped out of sight. I ran back inside and called 911 before I even thought to call my parents. The cops showed up and did a sweep. They asked if we had any enemies, anyone who held a grudge, any weird neighbors. I didn't know what to say. They couldn't find anyone outside, and there weren't any more signs of him. Eventually they left. I shut every window that night and blasted the AC. I didn't care about the electric bill. I just wanted every opening sealed. The next morning, when sunlight finally filled the house, I felt like I could breathe again. I never found out who that man was, and as far as I know, he never came back, but I still think about it, and I never stayed in that house alone again. This happened quite a while ago, back when I had just started my first real job out of college. I was living alone for the first time, renting a small single-level house in a quiet part of a town called Maple Hollow. The place was nothing special. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, just enough space for me and the occasional visitor. It was just what I needed at the time. The woman I rented from, I'll call her Karen, seemed kind enough. She was polite, a little reserved, and told me she preferred to rent to a young woman rather than a man. I figured it was just a safety thing and didn't question it. I'd been living there for a few uneventful weeks, settling in, learning the ropes at work, adjusting to being on my own. Everything was fine, until it wasn't. It started on a regular weeknight. I had just gotten home, changed out of my work clothes, and was heating something up for dinner when I heard a knock at the front door. It was late, definitely past the time when anyone should be coming by. I walked over, stood on the other side of the door, and asked who was there. No one answered. I stood still for a few seconds, trying to hear any movement, but it was silent. I didn't open the door. Something about it felt wrong. The next morning, after I'd gotten dressed and was grabbing my bag to leave for work, I opened the front door, and my heart jumped. There was a sticky note pressed to the glass of the storm door. It read, "Hello, beautiful." I immediately remembered the knock from the night before. It had to be the same person. Who else would leave something like that? I pulled the note off the glass, crumpled it, and tossed it into the trash. I didn't want to think about it. I convinced myself it was a one-time thing, someone playing a dumb prank. But that night, it happened again. This time, it was earlier in the evening. I was cooking, standing at the stove, when I heard another knock. I didn't say anything. I just turned off the burner and walked slowly to the door. There was no way to see outside. The door didn't have a peephole or glass window. The storm door didn't lock either. I stood completely still, listening. No voice, no footsteps. That was when the fear set in. I called my parents. I asked them what they thought I should do. My dad, who used to be a cop, told me the truth. Unless the person was caught in the act, the police wouldn't be able to do much. He advised me not to open the door again, not to go outside after dark, and to keep all windows locked. If it kept happening, he said he'd come down and stay with me. I followed his advice. The next morning, I woke up early and checked the storm door. Another note was there. "I like to watch you." I took a photo of the note and sent it to my parents. I also sent it to Karen, the woman who owned the house. I asked her straight out if she'd had any problems in the past. Any strange men? Former tenants? She acted surprised, claimed she'd never had any issues and that she was in a relationship, said she had no idea who it could be. I wasn't totally convinced. After work that day, I taped a message to the door. It said, "If you're looking for Karen, she doesn't live here. She just rents this house out. If you come back, I'll be calling the police." Leaving that note made me feel a little more in control. I believed it might put an end to whatever was going on. That night, I sat on the couch with the TV playing low, too tense to relax. Every sound from outside had me on edge, but nothing happened, no knocks. When I woke up the next morning, I felt a small bit of hope. Maybe the note had worked. I walked to the front door and reached up to take it down, but it wasn't my note. It was a new one. "I'm not looking for Karen. I'm looking for you." Below that, it had my name. I stood there, gripping the paper, completely frozen. I sent the photo to my dad immediately. I felt sick, physically sick. He packed a bag and drove out that same morning. By the time I got home from work, he was already waiting. That day at work felt like a nightmare. I couldn't think straight. I kept looking at everyone's face, wondering if it could be someone I knew. There was this guy, Mark, who always gave me weird looks at the office. Too intense, too quiet. I started to wonder if he was involved. That night, my dad and I waited. We held off on calling the police until later, hoping that if the stalker came back, they would see a squad car. We finally made the call around 10:30 p.m. Only one officer showed up. My dad didn't say much, but I could tell he was disappointed. He had hoped for a bigger response. Still, he walked the officer through everything, showed him the notes, gave him the timeline. Once the officer left, my dad stayed outside on the front step. He sat there for hours, long after I had gone to bed. No one came that night. A few days later, once I'd packed everything, I moved out. Karen didn't fight it. She was understanding, maybe even a little scared herself. Thankfully, whoever had been tormenting me didn't follow me to the new place. That made me feel like it had something to do with that house or that neighborhood. Maybe it wasn't anyone from my job after all. I never found out who it was, and I never will. "5 years ago, I was working the overnight shift at a gas station just outside a small town. I was broke and needed a second job, so I took whatever I could get. The shifts were long and lonely, but at least the pay was steady. It was around my second or third month there when this guy started showing up almost every night, always around 2 a.m. He was tall, maybe a little over 6 feet, with greasy shoulder-length hair and this slow, shambling way of walking. He'd always come in, grab a tall can of beer, pay for it, crack it open right there, and walk back out into the night. He never said much, just mumbled to himself as he left. Eventually one night, he looked at me and asked what my name was. I told him, and he just repeated it over and over, like he liked the sound of it. "Vic, Vic, I like that," he said, half laughing, half muttering. Then he wandered out the door again, drinking the beer he just bought, still talking to himself like I wasn't even there. That night, I got curious. I stood behind the counter and watched to see if he was driving, but he didn't get in a car. He just walked off into the darkness. That made sense. He never once bought gas, just alcohol. After that, he kept coming back, almost every night, sometimes drunk, sometimes worse than drunk. There were times he'd just stand in the aisle, leaning against the shelf, staring at the floor without saying anything. But he always greeted me when he came in, a casual mumbled, "Hey, Vic," like we were old friends. One night, he was standing in the same spot, just drinking and staring at the wall. I asked him finally, "What's your name?" He paused for a long time, then said, "Rick." It felt like a lie. Rick sounded too fake, too convenient. I got the sense it wasn't his real name, just something he made up on the spot. Maybe because it rhymed with Vic, but I didn't push it. I said, "So where do you work, Rick?" He let out a loud, jarring laugh that made me flinch. Then he said, "Nowhere. Government destroyed me. They took everything." He stared at me after that, hard, but his expression changed, less angry, more distant. "You're all right, Vic," he said. "You seem like someone who gets it." I had no clue what he meant. Then he walked out, just like that, and for a while he didn't come back. A week passed, then two. It was kind of a relief. Rick always gave off this weird energy. Not aggressive, but definitely unstable. Then came one of those nights. Thunder was shaking the roof. The rain was non-stop. Barely any cars on the road. I heard the door chime, ring out. Before I even looked up, I somehow knew it was him. And it was. Only this time, something was different. Something was wrong. Rick was soaked, completely drenched, like he'd walked through the storm without even trying to avoid it. No jacket, no umbrella. Just his usual black t-shirt and jeans. His hair was plastered to his face. He was standing just inside the door, staring at the far wall like he was in a trance. His body was stiff. His hands were clenched. His whole vibe felt dangerous. I said quietly, "Rick, you all right?" He didn't move, didn't look at me, just stood there, dripping water onto the floor. Then he said, "I did something really bad." My chest tightened. What? What do you mean?" That's when he looked at me. Finally. His eyes were bloodshot. I need somewhere to hide. Then he walked past me, right down the short hallway toward the restrooms. I didn't follow him. I didn't want to. I stood there frozen, trying to process what just happened. I told myself he was drunk again, maybe high, maybe just talking nonsense. Minutes passed. He didn't come back out. Then the lights went out. The entire gas station went black. I stood there in absolute darkness, in the middle of a thunderstorm, with a man who had just told me he did something terrible, hiding somewhere inside the store. I pushed through the door into the back room, my flashlight flickering across the shelves and boxes. I was heading toward the breaker when I heard it, dripping water, and the sound of wet shoes, that faint squeak. My stomach dropped. "Rick!" I called out, barely able to speak. No answer. Then, right to my left, I heard the squeak again. I swung the light in that direction. He was there, standing in the corner, his eyes wide open, his body hunched. He screamed, "I'm gonna kill you!" And then he lunged. I shoved him back as hard as I could. He grabbed at me, clawing my arm and shoulder. I broke free and sprinted toward the front of the store. He didn't follow. I grabbed my jacket, tore open the front door, and ran straight to my car. I locked the doors and called 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me until 2 officers arrived. They met me outside and went in together. Rick was still in the back room, crouched in a corner, breathing heavy. They said he looked like a wild animal. His pupils were huge. Whatever he was on, it had pushed him over the edge. I gave them my full statement, told them what he said, how he attacked me, that he claimed he did something really bad. A month later, I got a call from a detective. Turns out Rick's real name was Martin Harris. That night, that very same night, he had killed his ex-wife, beaten her to death in her apartment not far from the gas station. He walked through the storm, blood still on his clothes probably, and came straight to the store. I was this close to dying that night. After that, I quit. I swore I'd never work another overnight shift in my life, and I never have. My name's Lucas, I'm 25, and I live on my family's land out in rural Missouri. We've had this small farm for generations. Nothing commercial, just enough to feed us and sell a little locally. My folks plan to pass it down to me someday, since I'm the oldest out of 3 kids, and their only son. But between you and me, I don't think I want it. Living out in the middle of nowhere isn't exactly what I had in mind for my future, especially after what happened last July. That night changed the way I look at this place, maybe for good. My parents were away on a week-long trip, one of those rare getaways they take every few years, so it was just me and my 2 younger sisters, Kayla and Tessa, holding things down. Out here, it's all space and silence. That kind of privacy feels nice during the day. not so much at night. It started late, right as we were winding down. Tessa was holed up in her room working on online college classes. She takes summer courses. Kayla and I were in the living room, watching reruns of something dumb on TV. We all talk sometimes about leaving. None of us really want the farm life forever. Me especially. I feel like I've got better things to do in my 20s than wrangle goats in weed gardens. Still, there are parts of the job you can't avoid. One of the worst is dealing with thieves. And yes, people do steal from farms. Not often, but it happens. We keep a few rifles in the house just in case. That night, our two dogs outside suddenly started raising hell, barking loud and non-stop. Something was out there. I stepped outside and walked toward the backyard where they were going nuts, both of them facing the cornfield. I shouted at them to settle down, and for a second they did. Then I stood still and listened. Somewhere in that tall corn, I heard whistling. Human, no doubt about it. I'd never had to deal with a trespasser when my dad wasn't around. My first instinct was to grab one of the rifles. The dogs started up again, this time more frantic. I rushed back inside and told my sisters someone was out in the corn. I said I was going to scare them off. They both immediately told me that was a terrible idea. And honestly, they were right. Running into a dark field, alone, with just a gun and a hunch? Dumb. So instead, I stepped out back again and pointed the rifle to the sky. Boom! The shot echoed across the whole property. The dogs fell silent. I screamed as loud as I could. "You picked the wrong place. Get the hell off our land." I walked back inside. My sisters were giggling a little, mostly from nerves, and I laughed too. But that little moment didn't last. The dogs went off again. Even worse this time. I grabbed the rifle and rushed out, ready to fire another warning shot, until I saw him. There was a man standing just outside the cornfield, maybe 20 feet from where the dogs were. He was staring right at me. I yelled, "Hey!" And he turned and sprinted straight into the corn. I chased a few steps and fired again, into the air, not at him. Then I stopped. I wasn't about to follow him in there. No way. I ran to the dogs, unlatched their chains from the posts, and pulled them inside with me. I told my sisters what I saw, and their faces went pale. We didn't know what to do next, so we called Dad. He was calm but firm. "You're in charge while I'm gone. Protect your sisters. If he comes back, fire again. Don't take chances." That gave me a weird sense of pressure, but also a little reassurance. I loaded the rifle again and kept it nearby as we each went to our rooms. Tessa took one of the dogs, Kayla took the other. I brought the gun into my room and left the window open a bit, just to listen. I was watching a movie on my laptop when I heard it again, whistling. I scrambled to the window. There he was, someone walking slowly across the grass in the moonlight, right in front of the house, and then he stopped like he knew I was watching. He turned and faced my window, still whistling. It wasn't random anymore. He was deliberately trying to scare us. I grabbed the rifle, leaned out the window, and aimed down into the grass, then fired, hitting the dirt just a few feet in front of him. That was it. He ran like hell, disappearing around the side of the house. He didn't come back after that. I guess he finally realized we weren't playing around. I told my sisters everything. We stayed alert for the rest of the night, and the next few days were tense, but we never saw him again. To this day, we have no idea who it was. Maybe just a couple of local punks messing around, or maybe someone more dangerous. Doesn't really matter. I've seen enough. That night sealed it for me. I'm not staying here long term. Whatever plans my parents have for this place, I'm not part of them. I'm 20 now, but this happened when I was 19. I live in Newark, Delaware, which is usually a pretty quiet town until the University of Delaware students come rolling in for the fall or spring semesters. The school's well known and has a solid academic rep, but it's also infamous for being a party school. So, when classes are in session, the energy shifts big time. I work as a bike delivery guy, for Taco Bell. Still do, actually. That night took place during a typical midweek shift, either Tuesday or Wednesday, somewhere in late April or early May. I can't remember exactly, just that it was one of my usual 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. closers. Since we're one of the only food places open that late, besides bars, we get swamped with orders, especially from drunk students. It's chaotic, yeah, but I can't complain too much. It means more deliveries, and that means more tips. That night was wrapping up, and I was ready to clock out. But with maybe 5 minutes to go before 2 a.m., one last delivery popped up on the system, and of course it was mine to take. I was seriously annoyed. I'd already mentally checked out, but I didn't have a choice. At least I recognized the street and knew exactly where it was. One thing about Taco Bell in our town, we deliver by bicycle. Sometimes it's actually quicker than using a car, especially when traffic's jammed with college kids partying. I grabbed the bag and set off, pushing myself to get there as fast as possible. I made it in under 10 minutes, pulled up and knocked on the door. No answer. Knocked again, harder, still nothing. Now I was getting irritated. If no one came to the door, I'd have to ride all the way back with the order and waste time for nothing. I called the number on the receipt. No response. Just as I was about to call the store to report a failed delivery, I heard something. Rustling. Coming from across the street, behind a patch of bushes. At first I figured it was just wind, but something felt off. I looked anyway, and when I did, my stomach just dropped. Crouched low behind the bushes, in someone else's yard, was a person. A dark silhouette. Just sitting there, barely visible, but unmistakably human. I couldn't see his face, but somehow I knew he was looking right at me. I tried to play it cool, acted like I hadn't noticed him. My heart was pounding, but I turned back to the door and knocked again. Even louder. No answer. By now, panic was creeping in. The guy behind the bushes hadn't moved, just crouched there watching. Was this some kind of setup? I glanced again. He was still there. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to leave without handing off the food, but I also didn't want to just stand out there being watched by some sketchy figure in the shadows. I started pounding on the door non-stop, just hoping someone would finally hear me. Eventually, what felt like forever, someone finally opened the door. It was a college guy, stumbling out of one of the rooms, clearly half asleep and confused. When I explained I had his food, he said it wasn't his. Must have been his roommate. Of course, I was about to lose it. He went back upstairs to check, and I stood there alone again, too scared to look back, but even more afraid not to. When I did glance, I saw the man in the bushes had moved closer, still crouching, but now a few steps forward, keeping a better view of me. My brain was screaming to just get out of there, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the food and the bike. I also didn't want to step inside and leave my bike out alone, since I figured that guy might just snatch it, or worse, try something on whoever was inside if I let him in. Thankfully, the guy came back downstairs fast. He said his roommate's door was locked and he wouldn't answer, but I was welcome to leave the food with him. I didn't even care about the tip anymore. I basically begged him to take the bag, and he finally signed for it. The second the door shut behind him, I bolted for my bike. I threw the bag into the basket and lifted the kickstand. That's when I heard rapid footsteps. I spun my head to the left. He was charging. That shadowy figure from the bushes, he was now in full sprint toward me, wearing jeans, boots, and a black hoodie pulled tight over his head. I think he had a mask or something on too. Only his eyes were visible, and in one hand, what looked like a blade. I didn't waste another second. There was no time to turn around or double back. All the roads around were dead ends. My only chance was a nearby bike trail I'd used before. It wasn't lit, and I didn't have a light on my bike, but I didn't care. I pedaled harder than I ever had in my life and shot down the pitch-black path, flying blind. The trail wasn't long, and I knew it like the back of my hand, but every tiny sound had me flinching. Leaves rustling, distant footsteps, anything. It all had my heart in my throat. I never saw the man on the trail, and eventually I made it back to the store, shaking, sweating, hyperventilating. I didn't tell my coworkers or the manager, didn't call the cops either. What could I even say? I barely saw the guy's face. I just grabbed my stuff, threw my bike in the trunk of my car, and drove home, beyond grateful that I brought my car that night. Nothing happened after that. I never saw him again, but I haven't worked a closing shift since, and whenever I have to deliver at night, I now carry a pair of nunchucks with me, just in case. Newark's not the kind of town you think of when you hear stories like this, but that night taught me something real. Bad things don't care where you are. They happen when they want, where they want, to anyone. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing content. Thanks for watching.